Before you allow the demands of the day to reclaim your focus, there is something you need to sit with for a moment. This is not one of those messages that simply appears in front of you by chance and then fades away without consequence. There is a reason your attention landed here now, at this precise point in time. Long before your mind tried to explain it, another part of you recognized that something important was approaching. A deeper awareness, one that exists beneath logic and beyond ordinary reasoning, has been quietly guiding you toward this moment. Because once the new moon of June 16th arrives, a powerful energetic movement begins unfolding, and it will not pause for anyone who is unprepared. It will not wait until people feel ready. It will not stop to provide explanations, and it will not circle back to offer the same opening twice. Beneath the visible events of your life, something has been gathering strength for far longer than you realize. It has been forming during the quiet hours when uncertainty surrounded you, yet some unexplainable inner knowing continued to urge you forward. It has been developing within those moments when you questioned your path, but somehow continued walking it anyway. Yet hidden within this emerging chapter is a truth that many overlook. There is a delicate but significant factor capable of disrupting everything that has been assembling behind the scenes. The opportunities waiting to emerge, the breakthroughs preparing to reveal themselves, the blessings moving closer toward manifestation, all of them can lose momentum before they fully arrive if a certain inner pattern remains unnoticed. If you have recently felt as though something inside you has changed, if your reflections have become more profound, if your periods of solitude have carried unusual intensity, and if your intuition has been speaking with greater clarity than ever before, understand that these experiences are not random. They are signs of preparation. They are evidence that your inner world has been adjusting in anticipation of what is coming. And if, while hearing these words, you feel something stirring beneath the surface, if an emotional response or spiritual recognition is beginning to awaken, then part of you already understands why this message feels familiar. What stands ahead is not simply another passing phase. It is a moment of activation. Many people misunderstand the true nature of a new moon. They imagine it as a gentle reset, a peaceful opportunity to set intentions, and then wait patiently for the universe to deliver results. They treat it as a symbolic beginning that asks very little from them beyond desire itself. But the energy surrounding this new moon carries a very different purpose. Rather than offering comfort, it exposes reality. Rather than distributing possibilities indiscriminately, it acts like a mirror, reflecting your energetic state with remarkable accuracy. This is not a moment that asks what you hope to receive. Instead, it reveals what your current alignment has actually prepared you to accept. That realization can become a doorway into an entirely new stage of your destiny, or it can uncover a hidden imbalance that has been quietly postponing the outcomes you have been seeking. This is where countless people unknowingly lose momentum. They assume that wishing is enough. They believe intention alone creates transformation while continuing to hold tightly to fears, behaviors, and emotional patterns that directly oppose the future they claim to desire. That is why June 16th carries such significance. Not because something harmful is arriving, but because something authentic is coming into view. And when truth emerges, it rarely adjusts itself to preserve comfort. It asks for honesty. It asks for growth. Most importantly, it asks for transformation. Listen carefully, because this next part matters. After June 16th, the process of manifestation begins accelerating, but not in the way most people expect. This acceleration is not simply about acquiring desires, it is about encountering a direct reflection of your energetic reality. The universe responds to far more than spoken affirmations. Beneath every intention exists a deeper frequency, and that frequency communicates continuously. In the days following this shift, that hidden communication becomes increasingly visible. Any uncertainty concealed beneath confidence will begin revealing itself. Any fear disguised as certainty will rise into awareness. Any attachment pretending to be faith will gradually lose its disguise. What has remained hidden can no longer remain hidden. And this is exactly where the silent obstacle begins exerting its influence. The challenge is not outside of you. It is not another person. It is not unfortunate timing. It is not bad luck. It exists within your own internal responses, woven quietly into habitual ways of thinking, reacting, and attempting to navigate uncertainty. If it remains unnoticed as this shift unfolds, it can interfere with opportunities without ever announcing its presence. The most difficult part is that you may never recognize it in the moment. You may simply experience the absence of something that felt close enough to touch. The truth many people struggle to accept is that miracles are rarely destroyed by failure, timing, or external opposition. More often, they are delayed by resistance. Not obvious resistance, not direct rejection. Instead, a subtle form that hides beneath the desire to control every outcome. It appears as endless mental analysis. It disguises itself as preparation. It convinces you to calculate every possible scenario before allowing yourself to move forward. It encourages constant evaluation of events that have not yet happened. From the outside, it seems wise. It feels practical. It even feels responsible. Yet beneath that appearance, it creates tension between you and the natural unfolding of what is attempting to enter your life. And as this new moon energy continues to build, that hidden tension becomes one of the most important lessons you will be asked to recognize before the next stage of this journey fully reveals itself. What makes this period so significant is not the presence of an external obstacle, but the realization that the greatest interruption often comes from within. The moment you begin grasping too tightly for answers, demanding certainty before the path has fully revealed itself, you unknowingly interfere with the very flow that has already begun moving in your favor. The universe has never operated through force. It has never responded to pressure, manipulation, or the desperate need to control every detail. Its language is trust. Its rhythm is surrender. And when you attempt to replace trust with control, even with the best intentions, a subtle tension forms within your energy. Picture yourself standing before a doorway that has already begun opening. You can sense what is waiting beyond it. You can feel the possibility, the change, the breakthrough drawing closer with every passing moment. Yet instead of allowing the door to continue opening naturally, you become so focused on making certain it opens exactly the way you expect that you accidentally place your own hand against it. Not enough to notice immediately, but enough to slow the movement. That is the nature of resistance. It rarely announces itself. It disguises itself as effort. It appears as vigilance. It convinces you that holding tighter will bring greater security, when in reality it creates distance between you and what is already approaching. After June 16th, this dynamic becomes impossible to ignore because the energetic atmosphere surrounding this new moon is exceptionally responsive. Small emotional shifts create larger consequences. Subtle patterns that once remained hidden begin revealing themselves with surprising clarity. What previously went unnoticed will suddenly become visible. Even the smallest attachment to control can echo through your experience and disrupt opportunities before they fully materialize. This is why everything feels different now. Deep down, you already sense that you are no longer moving through an ordinary chapter of your life. You are standing at a crossing point, a delicate space between an old identity and an emerging version of yourself. These moments are powerful because they require movement. They ask for a choice. Whether that choice is made consciously or unconsciously, the threshold itself cannot be occupied forever. Eventually, you move forward, or you retreat into familiar territory. There is no permanent place in between. One path leads toward expansion, growth, and the future that has been gradually forming around you. The other leads back towards cycles that have already revealed their limitations. Neither path is hidden. The difference lies in whether you are willing to trust what is unfolding enough to take the next step. The universe is not evaluating you through criticism or judgment. It is responding to your energetic state with extraordinary accuracy. It reflects your readiness. It reflects your openness. It reflects your willingness to release what can no longer accompany you into the next stage of your journey. Because what waits beyond this shift requires a different relationship with yourself. It requires a version of you that is no longer entangled in old fears disguised as wisdom. If outdated patterns are carried into this new energetic environment, they will begin falling apart. Not because you are being punished, not because something has gone wrong, but because anything that no longer aligns with your direction must eventually dissolve. Sometimes awakening arrives gently. Other times it arrives through the collapse of structures that once felt necessary. What disappears is often what was preventing greater alignment from entering. Yet this is where many chosen souls unknowingly become trapped. The obstacle does not appear threatening. It arrives wearing the mask of caution. It presents itself as over-preparation. It sounds like endless internal conversations designed to prevent disappointment. It feels reasonable. It feels mature. It feels intelligent. Yet beneath all of those appearances exists a quieter truth. Much of what people call caution is actually fear seeking permission to remain in control. And fear, regardless of how sophisticated it appears, cannot coexist with the full expression of trust. Miracles emerge where openness exists. Transformation enters where resistance loosens its grip. The universe has never demanded perfection from you. It has never required that you eliminate every uncertainty before moving forward. What it asks is far simpler and far more challenging. It asks for willingness. It asks you to stop attempting to calculate every possible outcome and instead participate in a process that is already unfolding beyond the limits of your current understanding. You may not realize it yet, but you are standing closer to alignment than you have been in a very long time. Closer to the reality that has been quietly assembling itself around your choices, your growth, and your persistence. The distance between you and that reality is smaller than it appears. The question is whether you continue tightening your grip on what must happen next, or whether you finally allow yourself to release the need for certainty. There is a moment that arrives before every significant breakthrough. It is subtle. It is quiet. It often goes completely unnoticed by those who are expecting dramatic signs. At that moment, everything you have been calling toward yourself stands just outside the visible edge of your experience. Yet it rarely looks like success. It rarely feels like progress. More often, it arrives disguised as waiting, disguised as silence, disguised as unanswered questions. And this is precisely where many people abandon trust. They interpret stillness as failure. They mistake temporary quiet for permanent absence. They react before the process has completed its work. The mind begins searching for evidence. Doubt begins creating stories. Fear begins demanding action. And in that rush to regain control, alignment is disrupted. It is essential that you recognize this pattern because the final moments before transformation often resemble emptiness. They feel like nothing is changing. They create the illusion that movement has stopped. Yet beneath the surface, countless pieces are being positioned with extraordinary precision. Connections are forming. Timing is adjusting. Conditions are aligning. What appears inactive is often undergoing the most important preparation. If trust collapses during that stage, the energy shifts. Not because the blessing disappeared, but because fear temporarily interrupted your ability to remain aligned with it. This is why holding your ground now matters more than ever. There is meaning behind the unusual silence you have been experiencing. There is meaning behind the delays that seem difficult to understand. There is meaning behind the doors that appeared frozen rather than fully opened. None of it points toward rejection. None of it signals abandonment. What you have been experiencing is refinement. Before clarity arrives, distractions are often removed. Before direction becomes obvious, unnecessary noise is reduced. The universe creates space before it delivers revelation. Yet to a mind conditioned to seek immediate answers, that silence can feel uncomfortable. It can feel personal. It can feel like nothing is happening at all. And that misunderstanding becomes the next lesson you are being invited to see before the deeper truth finally reveals itself. The greatest misunderstanding you can make during this period is assuming that silence means absence. That assumption appears harmless at first, yet it carries enough power to redirect your entire experience. When answers seem delayed, when movement cannot be seen, when life feels suspended between what was and what is coming next, the mind naturally searches for explanations. And too often it arrives at the wrong conclusion. It begins whispering that something must be broken. It suggests that progress has stopped. It convinces you that if you cannot see evidence, then there must be nothing taking place. Yet this interpretation becomes the very thing that creates distance between you and what is already unfolding. The challenge before you now is not the silence itself. The challenge is the meaning you assign to it. Because silence is not empty. It is not a void. It is not a sign that you have been forgotten. In reality, it is filled with movement occurring beyond the limits of your current perception. It is filled with adjustments, alignments, and preparations that your physical senses cannot yet measure. Think about how often the most important changes in life begin long before they become visible. The deepest transformations rarely arrive with immediate proof. They develop beneath the surface first. They gather strength in hidden places. They take shape in ways that cannot be observed until the moment arrives for them to emerge. This is why your relationship with silence matters so much. The moment you interpret it as failure, your energy begins to contract. You pull inward. You become cautious. You begin questioning what previously felt certain. But the moment you recognize silence as preparation, something entirely different occurs. Your energy expands. Your perspective widens. You stop fighting against the process and begin cooperating with it. Following June 16th, this distinction becomes increasingly important because the energetic atmosphere surrounding you will respond with greater speed and accuracy than before. The way you perceive events will influence the way you experience them. Your interpretation becomes a powerful force. It shapes the emotional frequency you carry, and that frequency influences what you invite into your reality. Perhaps you have found yourself saying it recently, maybe only in your thoughts. Maybe aloud when frustration became difficult to ignore. You looked around at your circumstances and concluded that nothing was happening. Yet that conclusion is often born from a limited view of a much larger process. The universe has never measured progress solely through visible evidence. Some of the most significant shifts begin in complete invisibility. They occur beneath the surface, outside the range of ordinary observation. Consider what happens beneath the soil before any sign of growth appears. A seed does not immediately rise into the light. First it enters darkness. First it undergoes a silent process of transformation. Roots begin extending into places that cannot be seen. Structures form beneath the surface long before anything breaks through. During that stage, an observer might assume that nothing is taking place. Yet the opposite is true. Everything important is happening. And right now, whether you fully realize it or not, you are moving through a similar phase. There are developments occurring within you and around you that have not yet reached the point of visibility. The danger arises when impatience convinces you otherwise. Because once you believe that nothing is happening, your behavior begins reflecting that belief. You stop nurturing the process. You begin searching for alternatives. You attempt to force movement where growth still requires time. You become tempted to interfere with what was naturally unfolding. In doing so, you unintentionally disrupt the very progress you were waiting to see. This is why your beliefs carry such importance after June 16th. The energy surrounding this period acts like an amplifier. Whatever perspective you consistently hold becomes stronger. If your attention remains fixed on delay, your experience begins reflecting delay. If your focus remains grounded in trust and alignment, circumstances begin reflecting alignment. This is not about pretending. It is not about denying challenges or ignoring reality. It is about recognizing that unseen processes possess just as much validity as visible ones. Some of the most meaningful changes in your life are occurring before evidence arrives. More is moving into position for you than you currently understand. And there is another truth that deserves your attention. What if the uncertainty you have been experiencing was never a sign that something was wrong? What if it was the very experience meant to reveal who you are becoming? Many people imagine that tests arrive dramatically, announced in advance, and clearly identified. Yet life rarely operates that way. The most important tests often arrive disguised as ordinary moments. They appear as waiting periods. They appear as unanswered questions. They appear as emotional intensity that seems difficult to explain. The reason is simple. The test is not about circumstances. It is about your response to them. The universe places you within situations and then reveals what is already living inside you. When uncertainty appears, do you choose fear or trust? When answers are delayed, do you attempt to seize control or do you allow the process to continue? When evidence is absent, do you abandon your inner knowing or remain anchored in it? These are the questions being explored right now, whether consciously or unconsciously. And after June 16th, the results begin revealing themselves through your lived experience. Not as punishment, not as reward, but as reflection. You will begin seeing more clearly the energetic patterns you have been feeding. For many people, this realization arrives as a surprise because they never recognized they were participating in a test. They believed the challenge existed outside them, when in reality it existed within their own perceptions and reactions. Yet your awareness creates a different possibility. The moment you become conscious of the process, your relationship with it changes. Awareness interrupts unconscious patterns. Awareness creates choice. Awareness opens the door to transformation. This is especially important now, because one of the most underestimated obstacles during periods of powerful energetic acceleration is overthinking. In the past, overthinking may have simply slowed your progress. It may have created hesitation. It may have made simple decisions feel unnecessarily complicated. But in the heightened atmosphere that follows June 16th, its influence becomes far more significant. Overthinking begins creating distortion. Every extra layer of analysis pulls attention away from intuition. Every attempt to mentally control what is meant to unfold through alignment creates additional confusion. The mind starts searching for problems that do not exist. It invents scenarios. It creates fears. It generates complexity where simplicity was available. The truth is that your mind was never designed to manage the universe. Its purpose is to interpret experience, not control reality itself. The moment it assumes responsibility for outcomes beyond its reach, it begins manufacturing uncertainty. As the energy intensifies, thoughts gain greater momentum. Doubts become louder. Worries become more persuasive. And without a strong connection to your inner knowing, it becomes easy to become trapped inside cycles of mental noise. This is why the lesson before you now is not about fighting your thoughts. It is not about forcing silence upon your mind. It is about cultivating trust so deeply that unnecessary thoughts gradually lose their power. Trust creates space. Trust restores clarity. Trust allows intuition to speak again. What is meant for you does not require endless mental effort to arrive. It requires energetic alignment. And right now, a subtle transformation is available to you. It does not arrive dramatically. It does not demand attention. Many people overlook it because it appears so simple. Yet its impact reaches every area of life. It is the movement away from force and toward allowance, away from constant questioning and toward deeper trust, away from the exhausting attempt to control every outcome and toward surrendering to a process already in motion. This is the turning point where you stop demanding proof before believing and begin embodying the very clarity you have been searching for. And once that shift occurs within you, the next stage of this journey begins revealing itself in ways you never expected. There comes a moment in every profound transformation when the questions begin to lose their power. The constant need to know exactly when, exactly how, and exactly where something will arrive slowly starts dissolving. In its place, a different state of being emerges. It is quieter. It is stronger. It is rooted in a certainty that does not depend on visible proof. This is the shift now available to you. The shift where you stop standing outside your future, waiting for permission to believe in it, and begin living from the understanding that its arrival is already in motion. This is not fantasy. It is not wishful thinking. It is alignment in its purest form. When your energy becomes consistent with what you desire, the distance between you and that reality begins to disappear. The resistance that once acted as a barrier starts losing its influence. After June 16th, this distinction becomes increasingly important because the difference between those who continue waiting and those who begin receiving will not be determined by effort alone. It will be determined by embodiment. It will be determined by whether they continue struggling against uncertainty or finally learn to move with it. The most significant change does not happen outside of you first. It begins within. It begins with a quiet decision that nobody else can make on your behalf. The decision to release responsibility for what was never yours to control. The decision to trust what remains unseen. The decision to stop measuring progress only through evidence and begin recognizing it through inner alignment. That is the moment your power returns. That is the moment confusion begins dissolving. And that is the moment the path ahead becomes visible in a way it never could before. Yet what follows June 16th carries another layer of significance, one that many people are not fully prepared for. Something within your experience will become impossible to overlook, not because life suddenly becomes chaotic, not because disruption arrives to shake everything apart. Instead, clarity itself becomes impossible to avoid. A level of clarity so direct and uncompromising that every illusion still lingering within your awareness begins falling away. The intensified energy surrounding this period functions like a light shining into corners that have remained hidden. Habits that once operated automatically become visible. Emotional reactions you rarely questioned reveal deeper roots. Attachments that quietly influenced your decisions step into awareness. Fears that remained beneath the surface begin asking to be acknowledged. What was previously concealed beneath routine, distraction, and avoidance can no longer remain unseen. This is not happening to overwhelm you. It is happening to liberate you. Real transformation never protects the patterns that need to be released. It reveals them. It brings them into conscious awareness where they can finally be understood and transformed. For those who remain committed to denial, this process can feel uncomfortable because truth has no interest in maintaining illusions. It does not negotiate with avoidance. It does not adjust itself to preserve outdated narratives. Yet for you, this period represents something far more significant. It represents activation. It represents a level of self-recognition that changes the way you see everything. For the first time, you begin noticing the precise areas where your own energy has been creating limitations. You begin recognizing the beliefs, reactions, and unconscious tendencies that have quietly influenced your path. Once that awareness arrives, it cannot simply be forgotten. You cannot return to ignorance after seeing clearly. That is what makes this phase so powerful. Awareness creates irreversible movement. Once awakened, it continues expanding. Whether progress unfolds gradually or rapidly, the direction is forward. There is no genuine return to who you were before. As this deeper clarity emerges, another experience may begin unfolding alongside it. Old patterns may suddenly seem stronger than they have been in months. Familiar thoughts may return unexpectedly. Emotional triggers you believed you had already overcome may appear once again. Habits you assumed were behind you may attempt to re-establish themselves. It is important that you understand what this means. It is not evidence of failure. It is not proof that you are moving backward. In many cases, it is evidence that you are standing at the edge of finally outgrowing those patterns altogether. Old identities rarely disappear without resistance. They attempt to preserve themselves. They try to convince you that they remain necessary. They whisper familiar stories. They encourage familiar reactions. They invite you back into versions of yourself that once felt safe. But their return is not a command. It is a test of awareness. Every time you recognize an old pattern and choose differently, something profound occurs. The cycle weakens. Every time you refuse to return to what is familiar simply because it feels comfortable, you strengthen alignment with who you are becoming. Growth stops being theoretical and becomes real. It moves from intention into action. It becomes something lived rather than something imagined. You may already sense a subtle tension developing inside you, a quiet pull that seems difficult to explain. Part of you feels connected to old ways of thinking, old emotional responses, old definitions of who you are. Another part feels drawn towards something larger, something unfamiliar, something that carries a different frequency altogether. This tension is natural. It is not evidence that something is wrong. It is evidence that identity itself is shifting. Few people speak honestly about how uncomfortable this stage can be. You are no longer fully identified with the person you used to be, yet you have not completely settled into the person you are becoming. The result can feel disorienting. It can feel like standing between worlds. This is often the point where people retreat. Faced with uncertainty, they choose familiarity. Faced with growth, they return to old patterns because they seem predictable. Yet there comes a stage where genuine return is no longer possible. You have already experienced too much. You have already learned too much. Something fundamental has changed within you. And after June 16th, that internal movement becomes stronger. The pull toward expansion intensifies. The invitation becomes impossible to ignore. A question begins emerging beneath every decision. Will you continue moving toward the unknown with trust, believing that something greater is waiting ahead? Or will you attempt to reconstruct a past that no longer reflects who you have become? The answer to that question shapes everything that follows. For many years, control may have felt like protection, planning every possibility, preparing for every outcome, staying one step ahead of uncertainty whenever possible. These strategies created a sense of security in a world that often felt unpredictable. Yet there comes a point where what once protected growth begins limiting it. That point is approaching now. The illusion that control can guarantee safety is beginning to weaken. Not because control itself is wrong, but because its usefulness has reached its limit. The more intensely you attempt to manage every outcome from this point forward, the more resistance you create. And resistance interferes with alignment. The truth becoming increasingly visible is simple. What genuinely belongs in your life does not require force. It does not need to be chased endlessly. It does not need manipulation to become real. It arrives through resonance. It arrives through openness. It arrives through trust. Following June 16th, this realization becomes impossible to avoid. You'll begin noticing where your grip has been too tight. You will recognize situations where you attempted to control outcomes that were never yours to manage. And once you see this clearly, a choice appears. Continue holding tightly to what feels familiar and safe, or release it and step into a flow far more powerful than anything the mind could design on its own. This brings you to the most important threshold of all. An energetic doorway is opening before you, not a physical place, not a visible structure, but a powerful point of transition that responds directly to your state of being. Unlike many opportunities in the past, this one cannot be postponed indefinitely. It asks for a response, not through words, but through alignment. The decision before you has very little to do with external circumstances. It is about who you choose to become when certainty is unavailable. It is about how you respond when the future remains unseen. It is about whether you move toward trust or retreat into fear. This threshold does not punish. It does not reward. It simply reflects. When you step forward with openness, it responds by opening further. When fear causes hesitation, it mirrors that hesitation back to you. And after June 16th, this energetic gateway becomes increasingly active within your experience, setting the stage for everything that is about to unfold next.